This is a very old version of those exact same stories, or some of similar stories.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weirdness in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Atrahasis. Of course, even in the Bible, they're known as the Anak, A-N-A-K. We were grasshoppers in their eyesight, it says in the biblical text.
Now, some say that we have references to aliens, to extraterrestrials, in tablets like this one. Is that true? Well, let's find out. On that website, you can actually search the cuneiform tablets for what they say about the Anunnaki. You don't need to go out and learn Akkadian or Sumerian. You can go to this resource and test the claims of Zecharia Sitchin and others who promote his ideas.
So no matter where you go in any culture, you're going to discover that these beings, in some way, shape, or form, engaged mankind, brought knowledge, teaching, building techniques, and just so much more wisdom and information, esoteric wisdom, alchemy. All these things came from these people.
Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we exist to help you rediscover the Bible on its own terms. We found that the supernatural focus of the Bible has been suppressed, and we are bringing that back into the light. We're doing that with interviews and content from great scholars like N.T. Wright, Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, and featured here today, Dr. Michael Heiser. Today, we are continuing on the conversation that we featured between Dr. Michael Heiser and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan frequently cites the work of a supposed scholar named Zecharia Sitchin. He uses the claims of Zecharia Sitchin to support a flawed ancient alien theory, deliberately twist biblical text to fit this narrative. This is a popular theory that falsely evangelizes millions with the claims of Sitchin. Our resident scholar, Dr. Michael Heiser, worked diligently in his lifetime to research through the claims of Zecharia Sitchin. He found that key elements within Zecharia Sitchin's research wasn't just flawed, but completely bogus. Furthermore, Heiser defended scripture against these claims from Sitchin that somehow the Bible contained these teachings or were actually derived from them. In our last episode, we laid out some groundwork on Sitchin's ancient alien theory and how Rogan constantly promotes this theory as plausible. Right after that conversation Joe Rogan had on his podcast, Billy Carson, and this conversation of the Anunnaki and Sitchin's work was at the core of what they talked about. Almost 4 million people watched that episode, and it is filled with information that misrepresents the Bible and these ancient writings of Sumeria. Today, we're going to go a step further and give some detailed information from Dr. Michael Heiser that's going to give us the power to go and do our own research and find out what the truth really is. The Bible is a complete narrative that leads to Jesus, but much of the Hebrew scriptures are written in conversation with their culture and their ancient Near Eastern neighbors. The Hebrew scriptures are almost written as a polemic against these other ancient Near Eastern stories like the Anunnaki and the Apkallu. We are going to show here today how Joe Rogan, Zecharia Sitchin, and Billy Carson's approach to these ancient Near Eastern texts are flawed from the very foundation. We are going to give proof that the Bible stands set apart not for, but against this unholy union of spiritual evil communicating supposed wisdom to humanity. Genesis 6, the book of Enoch, the Apkallu, the Anunnaki, it's all connected. All of this is going to be tied together, and the truth is waiting for you on the other side of this episode. Let's get started.
Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think. But thinking shouldn't be strange. This is a cuneiform tablet. Cuneiform is an ancient script. Mesopotamian cultures used it. It was invented by the Sumerians, and it was adopted by the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, and a few other civilizations too. Now, some say that we have references to aliens, to extraterrestrials, in tablets like this one. Is that true? Well, let's find out.
So the craziest version of this story is that they genetically engineered us out of lower primates and put us here to mine gold.
Right.
And then established different types of civilizations and taught us how to build things, taught us all these different things. And enough time has passed that we've kind of forgotten. Enough time has passed. That's the wackiest version of it, right?
Right. That's the bare bones minimum.
Yeah, the wackiest versions they made us, which is we've talked about this a couple of times, but how bizarre it is that human beings have this incredible fascination for gold. We're fascinated with gold. Now, when you read Zecharia Sitchin's book, he talks about this in the 1970s. His description of it was that they needed to suspend gold particles in the atmosphere because their atmosphere was being destroyed.
Right.
Then you move to like somewhere around the 2000s when climate scientists start proposing this idea of suspending reflective particles in the atmosphere.
Right.
And then when you realize the unique properties of gold, how unusual it is in terms of like a building material, you can coat things. The reason why things are like coated in gold, silver plated, gold plated rather, you can take a tiny piece of gold and cover an enormous area with it. It's a strange metal.
Yeah.
Like really weird. And what, the supposed story is, it's very common on Earth, very rare on Nibiru.
Right.
Do cuneiform tablets really prove that aliens once visited Earth? Well, to go after this question, we need to start with really 4 introductory questions. Who makes this claim? Who are the ones, the writers, the teachers, people out there on TV or on the internet that actually try to argue this point? And then what are the specifics of the claim? Thirdly, can these arguments actually be tested? That's going to be important. And then fourth and lastly, what is the outcome of that testing? Now, we'll take these questions in order, and I want to start with the first 2 of them. Who makes this claim, and what are the specifics of the claim? Ancient alien visitation of Earth is not a recent idea. It's actually a pretty old one. Now, the idea that there might be other worlds, and those worlds might be populated by intelligent extraterrestrials, that goes way back to the early centuries AD. The idea that those intelligent extraterrestrials might have visited us, though, is a little more recent, roughly the 1800s to, of course, the modern time. It's still an idea that's quite popular. Now, you're probably most familiar with this idea through the writing of someone called Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods, or maybe Ancient Aliens, the TV show. That show has featured von Däniken in certain episodes and, of course, featured his work. But the specific ties to cuneiform tablets is something unique to someone called Zecharia Sitchin.
So many people have like an instantaneous reaction.
Yeah.
And that instantaneous reaction is, oh, hogwash.
Yeah.
If this was true, I would already know about it. It would be taught in universities.
Yep.
It would all be. But then you find out, like, no one is really just kind of trying to piece stuff together, specifically talking about these ancient tablets, which are, to me, some of the most interesting things about ancient history, particularly what came out of ancient Sumer.
Yeah.
Ancient Sumer, when you look at their tablets and, like, what are they saying? And why would they dedicate so much time to talking about this stuff?
Exactly.
Why do they have pictures of giant enormous people looking things with like a humanoid with a tail sitting on their lap? Like, what is this, just fiction?
Yeah.
Like, why would they detail this, and how do they have a representation of the solar system with the correct amount of planets and relatively the correct order and size? It's not exact, but it's an artistic version of the real thing.
Yeah.
And how the hell 6,000, 5,000 years ago do they know that?
Yeah. explanation is always going to the term mythology. They
Right.
throw mythology around, left and right to cover up the fact that they have no clue or idea. So they turn it into mythology so they can kind of say it's all fantasy and fairy tales, and this is how they express themselves or how they understood the universe. It's all mythology, it's all fake, but in reality, it's not all fake. These people left behind such detailed records and information. It's a time capsule of information on stone tablets for us today to be able to decipher, break down, and understand, and that's what we're here to do now.
Now, Zecharia Sitchin was a well-known author. His major work on this is called The 12th Planet. It was written in the 70s. It was actually part of a series, The Earth Chronicles. Sitchin was a Russian-American author. He died in 2010 at the age of 90, but by the time of his death, he had sold tens of millions of books in over 20 languages. Since his death, Sitchin's immense popularity has sort of been capitalized upon by others, namely Jason Martell and Michael Tellinger. If you were to look up cuneiform tablets, Sumerians, and ancient aliens, these are the names you're going to get in addition to Zecharia Sitchin. So those are the players. But what about the claims? What do they actually argue? Now, what specifically does Zecharia Sitchin say that the cuneiform tablets say about aliens visiting Earth? Well, the specifics are this. Sitchin claims that the tablets describe an alien race known as the Anunnaki, who were worshipped by the Sumerians and civilizations afterward. The Anunnaki came from Nibiru, which was, according to Sitchin, a planet beyond Pluto. Now this planet, and again Sitchin claims that the tablets actually tell us this, cycled through the solar system and sort of got in our neighborhood and appears in our neighborhood every 3,600 years. And during one of these cycles, the Anunnaki sort of got off the boat and they visited Earth. When they got to Earth, they genetically engineered primates and made us, human beings. You say, well, why would they do that? Well, the Anunnaki liked gold, it was important to them, and so they wanted to create a race of slaves to mine gold. Now, all of these claims can be tested and deserve attention. What we're going to do is take a look at the tablets and ask the very simple question, do the cuneiform tablets actually speak of an extraterrestrial race known as the Anunnaki who come from a place, a planet, called Nibiru?
Now, Zecharia Sitchin, I don't particularly go by his work, not because it's controversial. I believe he was one of the greatest researchers of all time. And the reason why is because he laid out so much information for us to begin to scratch our head and ask questions. But what I figured out was that by going through the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library, say that fast 10 times, I was able to take stone tablets and decipher them myself. So anyone can go online to the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library and read these stone tablets for themselves. You don't need Zecharia Sitchin, you don't need anyone else. And as I began to break these tablets down,
Do they have them transcribed, or are you reading the actual tablet?
they transcribe them. They actually transcribe them. And what's incredible is this text was translated in the 1800s, long before Zecharia Sitchin was born. So there are some rumors that, he was the only one that could decipher these tablets. Well, no. George Smith, who worked as an Assyriologist and wrote many books and deciphered these Sumerian tablets in the 1800s. So we're talking about texts that have been deciphered for a few hundred years, nothing that was just deciphered recently.
The way we're going to determine if this is valid or not is to go to the primary sources. I'm going to show you a website called the Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature. On that website, you can actually search the cuneiform tablets for what they say about the Anunnaki. You don't need to go out and learn Akkadian or Sumerian. You can go to this resource and test the claims of Zecharia Sitchin and others who promote his ideas. So let's do that. We're here at the Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature website. Now what we need to do is go to where it says Advanced Search and click on that link, and that's going to take us to the search page. And in the field that says Search For, we want to type A-NUN-NA. Now this is Anuna, it's not Anunnaki. Anuna is the lexical form of the word that will capture both forms of this name. Anuna, Anunnaki, same group of deities in Sumerian literature. We want to make sure that we select, instead of form, lemma, and that will capture everything, either Anuna or Anunnaki. So we want to just hit our return key. And what we get is 182 lines in the cuneiform tablets about the Anunnaki. Now you'll notice in the middle column that we have Anuna, and the hit below that is Anunke. That's Anunnaki. So we get both results in our search. And you say, well, I can't read any of that because I don't know Sumerian either in cuneiform or in transliteration. Well, you don't have to know that. If you look at the second line, there's a little TR right here. If we click on that, that takes us to an English translation of that particular line in that particular tablet. What we have here is a database. This database will allow you to get to every place where the cuneiform tablets talk about the Anunnaki, or the Anuna, the shorter form of the term. You can check the claims of Zecharia Sitchin yourself. All you have to do is click through each hit, each occurrence, and just read the text in English. And you will find something pretty surprising, at least to those who really buy into ancient astronaut theory, specifically that you find all this information in cuneiform tablets. You're going to find that that idea is quite lacking in the primary sources.
So what are the first decipherings? Like what year was the first deciphering?
It was in 1800. I think around 1850. George Smith. He actually worked at the I believe it was Cambridge.
And what was his take? Like, when he's reading all these wacky stories and all the Anunnaki stuff? Like, what's his take on it?
He is literally subscribing to this information the way almost that you and I see it today. These people saw something, experienced something, interacted with something, and he cataloged it, and it inspired him to write a complete translation of the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation. And he talks about the fact that that information was copied right from those tablets and put into the Old Testament of the Bible. And so, not exactly like it's going to go from here to the Bible, but it went to other ancient papyruses and scriptures and so forth. And then later on, when it was discovered in caves, people took those and then said, okay, we got to put this into a book. And then it became the Bible much later, around 100 AD. But he subscribed to the theory that these people interacted with beings in some way, shape, or form, and that also this information is so incredible that it became part of the biblical text.
Now, I'm sure it would be a thrill, maybe at least for me, to go through all 180 lines of our search, looking at each one individually, validating what I can sort of summarize for you right here, though. And that is, the primary texts refute the claims of Zecharia Sitchin and anyone else who puts forth his ideas that we have Anunnaki, an alien race from a planet called Nibiru, that visited Earth. There are no texts, and not even a single line of a cuneiform text, that affirm that the Anunnaki are from Nibiru. I'll take it even further than that. There isn't a single text that associates the Anunnaki with Nibiru in any way at all. Now that might sound like an outlandish claim, but I've just shown you the search, and you can do the search for yourself. You could take the time to go through all 180 or so lines and validate or invalidate a claim. My claim, again, is that the cuneiform tablets don't have this information. So what's important is that we stick to primary sources for what we say that an ancient person believed, or something that happened in the ancient world that might be referenced in a particular piece of literature, like a cuneiform tablet. We need to go to the tablets themselves. The search item, again, you can do for yourself. You go to our website about this episode. I will reproduce what you need to type in right there, and you can run the search for yourself. We're not done with the Anunnaki, though. There's a lot more to think about. They may not be extraterrestrials, but we just saw they show up in cuneiform texts a lot. So who in the world were the Anunnaki? That's what we want to take a look at.
This one connects to a recent popular video that you just brought up. You said you were watching as we started the video that we put out about Joe Rogan, Zecharia Sitchin versus the findings of Heiser and biblical scholarship. We found through Heiser that many, like Sitchin and Joe Rogan, misuse these ancient Near Eastern texts to promote a flawed ancient alien theory. Let's check this out.
Every point in Genesis 6, 1 through 4 has a counterpoint in the Mesopotamian Apkallu story. The Enochian material, the material written after the biblical stuff but before the New Testament, okay, intertestamental, Second Temple Jewish literature, for some reason, and there are academic explanations for this that make sense. But again, the quick version is, for some reason, whoever's writing the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and some of these other books, the Book of the Giants from Qumran, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, whoever's writing this stuff knew the Apkallu story really well. And they write their version of Genesis 6, 1 through 4 with the Apkallu story in mind. So this is why Enoch has the offending watchers being sent to the realm of the dead and bound, because that's what happens to the Apkallu. We don't read that in Genesis 6. We only got 4 verses there. You get hints of it a little bit later with some of the Rephaim who live in the netherworld, and passages like Ezekiel 32. You get little bits and pieces of it. But whoever's writing the Enochian stuff is really well aware of this. And they preserve the original context for Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So we can look at that and we can kind of know, what they're sort of fishing for, because if we know the Mesopotamian Apkallu story, we can read Genesis 6, 1 through 4 and say, okay, sons of God, daughters of men, Nephilim, before and after the flood. Okay, we know what they're shooting at. But it's the Enoch stuff that adds their punishment. And that's the stuff that Peter and Jude pick up on and winds up in Peter and Jude.
I really like that clip.
Yeah, I had actually never seen that clip before. That was pretty cool.
It was actually fun making the clips for this because I was just like, man, I get to dig through everything and find the coolest stuff because I have tons of stuff saved. So yeah, that was awesome. So first, before I say anything, your thoughts on that clip and the Apkallu connection?
Yeah, I think like with the Apkallu connection, Amar Anus was kind of he was the pioneer, right, of that connection. And Heiser, is it in I Dare You Not to Bore Me with the Bible? He has that little article on it's called All Your Genesis Commentaries Are 8-track Tapes, right? And then he says that no Genesis commentary post, what was it? Was it 2015 or 2013? Whenever Amar Anu's stuff came out, that anything before that was an 8-track tape, which is I found pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, the Apkallu as the backdrop of Genesis 6, I think is huge. And you can see that all throughout Mesopotamian literature if you read some of it yourself. There's a good little book, I think it was either on the first or second interview that Ron Johnson did with Awakening. He shows this little book, and you could go watch that. And I can't remember the name of the book right now. I could look it up, but it's got all of like the Mesopotamian stories that kind of parallel the Old Testament, and they've put them there for you of what they think fits together. So I would recommend picking that up and reading it for yourself, because when you read it for yourself, some of the stuff that Sitchin says is just crazy. Like, I mean, and I know he's doing his own supposed translation work, but I mean, when you're reading it for yourself and you look at the ancient lens of what they knew, looking at through an anthropological lens of like what these people knew, like they didn't know about our modern conception of UFOs, like and aliens coming down to like mute make mutant DNA. Like, I think that's just ridiculous on itself.
Yeah.
And these scholars like Amar Anus and Dr. Heiser are just great at clearing some of this stuff up. And I hate to see that, Joe Rogan on such a popular podcast has kind of fallen into that, but I don't really blame him for that. So
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I will give him credit to say this for Joe Rogan. He does always quantify it with that this could be a bunch of baloney or something like that. But he's just
yeah,
really,
right. I remember that.
yeah, he's just really intrigued by it, and he pushes it a lot. But it's I just think it's important because it's like what you said. The people who wrote the Bible had a different conception of the universe. Their cosmology, we just did a whole series on this, was just a completely different view than what we have in our modern Western context. And when you try to force those two together, you're always going to have problems. And the Bible, we can discuss this. The Bible is always in conversation with culture, whether you're in the Hebrew scriptures and it's in the conversation with its ancient Near Eastern neighbors, or we go to the New Testament and how it's in conversation with the Greco-Roman world and culture that it's around itself. But I don't know if you can speak to it, but this Mesopotamian Apkallu connection being like a Hebrew polemic or political witness against the narrative. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think that it's just awesome to kind of read the Hebrew text in that light when you have that background knowledge that we've uncovered.
It's like that's what that polemic is against, and what it's showing is the Bible validates the Mesopotamian narrative, but it reconstructs the impact of the spiritual tampering with humanity, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then what does that have to say about the New Testament, with Jesus, like being the one and only unique Son of God? Like it just flips the whole story on its head, right?
Yeah, and then new
Yeah.
creation, take it there. And that what that really is that the reinventate, like that's how we can make it into our heaven on earth, the kingdom come here on heaven or here on earth as it is in heaven, the New Jerusalem. How the how that the new creation is going to be minus all of that tampering with, I guess you could say. And yeah, I've never even thought about it in that light. I think that's really, really interesting. And that's what all these things bring. And it's tough at first. And I'll just encourage anybody who's listened to this that it might be just like, wow, that's a lot. It was a lot for me for a while. And to really take these things in, we've got lots of videos on them that you can just kind of digest. But when you really understand the Bible in conversation with culture and take out this modern Western context and see the Bible for what it is, it's worth the work to get there. And when you see this Apkallu connection, I can just almost remember, like you talk about your watershed moment. I can remember when I was doing editing, like I kept bumping into Heiser talking about the Apkallu, and I'm like, I just need to listen. I finally got to just really like hear what he's trying to say. And I was like, what? Like it just, it really, all the three rebellions, Genesis 6, it made everything open up to
If Rogan
understand.
had that, if Rogan could just read Heiser's work, I feel like his mind would be blown too. How much of a curious person he is, and an intelligent person, I think.
Could you imagine Heiser on Rogan? That would be the one. I think that would be the one, because I've seen, personally, I watched Rogan a little bit. It's kind of like, I'm like you. My main itch is for biblical information. I love it. Like I never get bored with it. I always want it. It's like it's something that just I love and get into. Like if I'm sitting out back, I'm listening to a podcast. If I'm driving, I am. All that stuff. Yep. But one of my unplugs, one of my unplugs is Rogan, because then it's just like, he's a free thinker and just kind of understanding lots of different topics and stuff like that. That's kind of one of my only things. And I've observed all these different conversations that he's been having, that I feel like even if he's not 100% receptive, it feels like there's some force outside that's coming through, like the Holy Spirit, that's trying to speak truth in a lot of these podcasts. And I'm not saying that they are a good source of truth, but I've just noticed that. And, Heiser would have been, that's what I'm saying. Heiser, if right now we could just line him up right now after he just had all those different podcasts, it would be just like these, these things, the bricks that would come together in the puzzle pieces.
These figurines that you see are put forth by ancient alien theorists as being examples, illustrations, depictions, idols of the Anunnaki. You'll notice that they are reptilian in form, they are lizard-like, and so the claim is that the Anunnaki were reptilian aliens. Now, these figures are actually very well known to Mesopotamian archaeologists. They are not a mystery. There are many publications about them. One such publication is a book entitled Beyond the Ubaid. And in this book, there's a specific chapter on these figurines. The chapter is entitled A Snake in the Grass, Reassessing the Ever-Intriguing Ophidian Figures. Ophidian is an academic term for serpentine or reptilian. Now I want to read a little bit of this article to see how professional Mesopotamian archaeologists who are very familiar with these figurines, what they actually say about them. 25 figurines were discovered at the site of Ur. 2 of them come from a house in Pit F, dated to the early Ubaid period. They were found along with domestic and utilitarian artifacts, such as pottery, pounders, grinders, flint hoes, clay sickles, net sinkers, and spindle whorls, attesting to their probable use alongside or during everyday activities. Other later Ubaid figurines from Pit F were found in loose soil, in rubbish strata, mixed with Ubaid pottery of earlier phases. Now, did you catch that phrase, in rubbish strata? That means they were actually found in garbage pits. That really isn't the kind of thing that you would do if the thing you were throwing away was an item of worship, a sacred object. But nevertheless, this is where some of these figurines were actually found. So how do we evaluate the figurines against what we actually get in archaeology? Well, we need to think about that. The truth is that these figurines that ancient alien theorists put forth to us as being representations of the Anunnaki, their use is really unknown. Nobody really knows what these things are. What they represented is also unknown. How they were used is frankly unknown. Now, we just saw or read that they were found among very simple everyday objects, and sometimes even in trash pits. So it's pretty doubtful that these would be sacred objects. You don't just throw those things in the trash. There's no known connection as well to the Anunnaki. And you say, well, how do we know that? Well, we know that because of the archaeology. And we've actually given you the answer to this in the quotation and even back in the picture of the figurines themselves. The Ubaid culture is prehistoric. No one in the field disputes this. You say, well, who cares? What's the big deal? Why should we be concerned if they're prehistoric? How does that answer the question of whether these are the Anunnaki or not? If they're prehistoric, roughly 5,500 to 4,000 BC is where archaeologists put these things. That is before the invention of writing, even in Sumer, the earliest writing that we know. That means that there is no writing on them. Now, we've already seen, again, if you repeat the search, you can validate this, that the Anunnaki are not described. They're not associated with another planet from Nibiru. None of these things are actually in the text. And now we're in a situation where we have these objects and nothing is written on them. And because they're prehistoric, they weren't found with anything else that had writing. There is literally nothing that associates these figures with the beings known as the Anunnaki. Now, we've seen there's no reason to associate the Ubaid figurines with the Anunnaki. We have no written text that makes that association, and the figurines themselves are prehistoric. Having any kind of textual information at all is going to be impossible because when they were made, writing did not exist in Sumer.
We have a huge announcement to release to you today. Ring Them Bells has partnered with Visual First Films and we are going to be producing a top-rate documentary going over the teachings and life of Dr. Michael Heiser. I want you to stay tuned for ways that you can get involved and help support this project. But for now, take a moment to subscribe so that you're aware of all the alerts that'll be coming up and releases about this documentary and other great content that we have coming your way.
So when you're reading things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for people who don't know, is one of the oldest versions of a lot of the stories that you hear in the Bible. Very similar to them. There always seems to be a great flood. There's a few heroes. There's angry gods. There's a bunch of stuff going on. And Zecharia Sitchin's work was like the most controversial on the Sumerian text, right?
Yes.
Because there's a whole website called sitchiniswrong.com. Like, people go crazy about him.
Yeah.
But when he starts talking about it, when you read some of the things that they wrote, and when you see like some of the images that they created, the images that look like the double helix from DNA, and there's a bunch of that now we represent the caduceus, which represents pharmacies and drugs. Like that's the old version of an image of the double helix of DNA, or at least it looks super similar to that.
Oh, it definitely is, because it's referenced even in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and other ancient texts. So there's no coincidences here.
Nevertheless, the Anunnaki are in a lot of texts. We've already seen that as well. So who were they? Well, the primary sources are the place to go for that information. The most recent project on Sumerian to collect the data and produce for scholars a dictionary of Sumerian literature is the electronic Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary Project. This is a project run at the University of Pennsylvania, and the dictionary is also published in hard copy. There are a few volumes out. The first one actually has the entry for Anunnaki. The name, according again to the text, does not mean those who from heaven came. That's a famous Sitchin translation for the term Anunnaki. It actually means princely seed, or someone who is high-born or noble. It's the idea of nobility. You also see on the internet translations like offspring of Anu, the sky god, and again arguments try to make a connection between sky god, which is An, and extraterrestrials. But that's actually not a very good translation for a simple reason. The word's usage. In the Sumerian tablets, and again the PSD, the Pennsylvania Sumerian Dictionary, is going to note this, Anunnaki is actually a term used of people on occasion. Just normal people and their siblings. Now that makes sense if the term means princely seed or highborn or nobility. One human being could refer to another human being along those lines, in those terms. So there's nothing inherently about the term that has to mean some sort of descendant of deity, descendant of the sky god. There's nothing like that in and of itself. However, most of the uses of Anunnaki are referring to a group of gods in Mesopotamian religion. Now we could ask the question at this point, are these high gods or low gods? And the answer in Mesopotamian religion, Sumerian religion, is, well, they're actually both. They're both because in some texts they are very highly elevated, very highly regarded, and in other texts they are consigned to the underworld. They have low status. A good place to get this kind of information about the Anunnaki is also another source from the University of Pennsylvania, the Mesopotamian Gods and Goddesses Project. Now, Penn, for many years, was the center of Sumerian scholarship, really since the early 20th century. And you say, well, thanks for the history lesson, why should I care? Well, you should care because Samuel Noah Kramer was the Sumerian professor there. He was still there when I was there. Penn is one of my alma maters. But Kramer was an important Sumerian scholar at this particular place. And I mentioned him because Zecharia Sitchin quotes a lot from Samuel Noah Kramer's writings. Now, Kramer knew what the term Anunnaki meant. So why would Sitchin sort of either not quote him in that regard or misquote him or sort of ignore the information? Well, I have to leave that for you to decide. But the authority that Sitchin relies on for certain points of his writing would have disagreed when it comes to the meaning of the term Anunnaki and, of course, all the extraterrestrial stuff.
Because this is going to tie it all together. This actually works out perfectly. So I want to close with one of a favorite of Heiser's and this channel's, the supernatural connection of aliens and the demonic world. This clip that we're going to show really sheds light on why the ancient alien misconception that we've talked about is so important for us to straighten out.
My view, personally, again, if we take off the table the nuts and bolts kind of discussions about, hey, could there be aliens or not? The academic discourse. If we take that off the table and we talk about the spiritual messaging elements, I think what's going on is we have intelligent beings, intelligent, non-human, divine, spiritual beings, whatever you want to call them, trying to control the language of spirituality. But I think the intelligent evil wants to control and redefine the terminology. They want God redefined as a transcendent extraterrestrial. They want Jesus redefined as a messenger from the transcendent extraterrestrial, or an extraterrestrial himself. They want the need of humanity not equated with sin, a solution for sin, but to evolve to be a transcendent being like they are. Think about it. If you had the same vocabulary that we use in religious discourse, God, Jesus, salvation, humanity, destiny, transcendence, glorification, heaven, all these things, but they all had different meanings that attached themselves to this whole extraterrestrial question. Well, guess what? You get to keep your Bible. We don't change any of the words. However, what the words mean is something different. This is something akin to, conceptually at least, when the Nachash, the serpent, walks up to Eve and says, hey, did God really say? And then they have a conversation where Eve is misled or misdirected, led to process what God said in a different way.
So, Heiser is helping us see that the supernatural evil has something to gain with equating God and the spiritual world to ancient aliens or aliens coming to this world. I think this sheds light on everything that we've just talked about with the Mesopotamian Apkallu story, and even now this ancient alien theories and how they're both kind of connected, right, to spiritual evil. It's like the same story evolved, and the Bible speaks out against both. No, we recently interviewed Matthew Halstead, and that was exactly his sentiment. And I think that that's a balanced way to approach it and understand it, is to say that, like, anything that tries to go against the gospel and to change the way that you view Jesus or you view the narrative of God and all that we have, that can very easily be called demonic. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to work too hard there. And that those things, even just like they did when we just talked about with the Mesopotamian context through the Apkallu, when those type of influences were trying to change the way people looked at the ultimate relationship of who God is into people, it's the same way with some of these ancient alien theories and how they misconstrue the Bible stories of Genesis 6 and all those things.
Now, finally, if you go to the Penn site, the Project on Gods and Goddesses, it will point out that there are no known artistic depictions of the Anunnaki. We know that they are not the Ubaid figurines because, again, nothing tells us that. There's no text, and they're prehistoric. There's no written material at all to associate one thing with the other. The Anunnaki are also sort of interesting because there's no known cult or sanctuary in Mesopotamian archaeology, which is quite a big field. There's no known system of worship associated with them. Now, again, we don't have all the information. There's lots that hasn't been discovered. So someone might dig up some cult center somewhere that mentions the Anunnaki. We don't know. But to date, there is no evidence that they were even worshipped. And again, if you go back to the figurines, some of them wind up in the trash heap. So what we have here is essentially, if you're going to defend the idea that these figurines are the Anunnaki, or that the Anunnaki come from Nibiru, or any of these sort of famous ideas associated with the Anunnaki by ancient alien theorists, you've got an argument from silence. There is actually no primary source data to support any of this at all.
When you look at these ancient languages like cuneiform, can you read that? Do you know how to read it?
Yeah, a small amount of it, yeah. Studying
How
it
does it
from
work?
books that I have bought right off of Amazon.
Oh.
So where does this leave us? Well, we can conclude that the Anunnaki were indeed Mesopotamian gods, but their status varied. Sometimes they were depicted as high gods, other times low gods. We can conclude that they were not extraterrestrials. There is nothing in the cuneiform material that indicates that at all. And again, we are trying to go back to primary sources. They were also not the serpentine Ubaid figures. Again, there's no writing associated with those figures. They're prehistoric. We have nothing upon which to base this idea. Ultimately, what we have is, as I mentioned before, a glorified argument from silence. Now, what we need to do and concentrate on is primary sources, and that's what we do here at Fringe Pop 321. Please check out our website. We will have show notes dedicated to this episode, sources for you to go to look up. And again, don't just depend on our word for it. Do the work yourself, do the research yourself. It is within your grasp to find out and to answer these questions, because what you know may not be so.
We've got so much to be grateful for. I am grateful for you for liking, subscribing, and sharing the content. It does so much for us. I wanted to take a quick second, and if you haven't done that, ask you to subscribe, like, and share the content. It does so much for us to help get the message out about what God has done for this world through Jesus and the power of the cross and the resurrection.
Problem solved. He has no claim on you at all. And so this, my ministry, my message, is the beginning of him losing ownership of the world. This is where it begins. What spiritual warfare is the growth of the kingdom of God, the Great Commission, and the diminishing of the other kingdom. The way that's accomplished is telling truth. You speak truth to lies.